The faint hum of distant lightsabers echoed through the halls of the Jedi Temple, mingling with the deep thrum of Coruscant's cityscape. The once serene corridors, lined with statues of ancient Jedi, were now painted in shadows and fear. The temple, the heart of the Jedi Order, was under siege. Kirus Toll, a youngling barely on the cusp of understanding the full power of the Force, crouched in a dim corner of the temple's meditation room. His breath was shallow, heart was pounding as he felt the darkness closing in. The Force had warned him just moments before the heavy boots of the clone troopers stormed the room where his friends had been training. He watched from his hiding place as the others, his friends, fell one by one. Jarrah, Talon, Nimra, their screams rang in his ears, but it was the cold presence that followed them that gripped his soul. Anakin Skywalker, cloaked in black, eyes burning with a darkness Kirus had never felt before. Kirus squeezed his small frame deeper into the shadows, trying to make himself invisible, trying to disappear. His pulse was racing, his mind flashing through the last lesson he'd learned about staying calm in the face of danger. But this was no lesson. The clone's blaster fire had cut down his friends, but it was Anakin's lightsaber that ended their lives. He felt the rage radiating off of the man who was once their protector. The man who had smiled at them, taught them, was now killing them. Kirus clutched the small training saber in his trembling hand.
I must stay hidden. I must stay silent.
Then the silence fell. A cold, suffocating silence. Anakin stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the fallen younglings. His breathing was slow, controlled, but filled with a wrath Kirus couldn't comprehend. And then, with terrifying precision, Anakin's gaze shifted, piercing through the darkness straight to where Kirus hid. Kirus gasped. He knew it was over. Anakin moved silently, his dark cloak flowing behind him like a storm. Kirus felt the overwhelming urge to run, but his legs refused to move. As Anakin approached, the youngling stared into the man's eyes. There was no mercy, no compassion, only hate, only power. For what seemed like an eternity, they stood there, a helpless child before the wrath of a Sith. Kirus flinched, expecting the death blow, but it never came. Anakin's eyes flickered. His hand gripping the lightsaber twitched. The room filled with the weight of his decision. For a moment, something passed between them, something Kirus couldn't understand. He saw not compassion, but hesitation, a flash of something broken within the darkness of Anakin's soul. Without a word, Anakin turned and walked away, leaving Kirus alive amidst the fallen. The weight of his survival crushed him as he watched the empty halls, thick with the stench of death.
Why? Why was I spared?
Kirus looked down at the lifeless bodies of his friends, his brothers and sisters in the Force, and felt nothing but hatred swell inside him. The Jedi, his teachers, his guardians, had failed. They weren't there to save them. No one was. His small hands clenched into fists. The Force pulsed inside him, not with the calm serenity of the Jedi teachings, but with raw, unchecked emotion. The anger surged through him like a storm. His tears of grief turned to bitter resolve.
They left us. They let this happen.
His voice shook with fury, the echoes bouncing off the stone walls. He could still feel Anakin's presence, the rage that filled him. And suddenly, Kirus understood.
Anakin wasn't a savior. He was the instrument of their destruction. But I will destroy him.
Kirus stood, the flicker of innocence in his eyes snuffed out. There was no one left to guide him, no Jedi to tell him to calm his emotions or suppress his fear. The darkness was all that remained, and it felt powerful. In that moment, the youngling made his vow. He would train, he would grow stronger, and he would kill the man who had spared him. Not out of gratitude, but out of vengeance. In this story, Anakin spared the life of one youngling from the good of his heart. Now the rage of this youngling has sowed seeds of darkness within himself. What will happen in this scenario? Stay tuned for this episode of What If. And remember, if you like content just like this, be sure to hit like and subscribe for more. The streets of Coruscant stretched endlessly before Kirus Toll, overwhelming and chaotic. The towering buildings, gleaming with the bright lights of the Empire, cast long, oppressive shadows over the lower levels where the young Jedi had been forced to hide. He had escaped the slaughter at the Jedi Temple, but now, days later, he was lost, starving, and hunted. The clones patrolled every corner, their armored boots stomping through the filthy streets. Kirus was exhausted, his Force presence flickering like a dying ember. He knew he couldn't run much longer. He had lived on scraps, hiding in the dark alleys, always afraid to close his eyes for fear of the stormtroopers, or worse, the Sith. The sensation of being hunted was constant, like a cold grip on the back of his neck. He could still feel Anakin's dark presence echoing in his mind, that singular moment where death had looked him in the eye and chosen to pass. It was a weight he could not bear. Kirus Toll was spared, but for what? To die cold and alone in the underbelly of the galaxy's most dangerous city? The youngling stumbled into the depths of Coruscant's industrial sector, his small hand pressing against a cold wall to steady himself. His body was shaking, barely able to stand. It had been too long since he'd eaten, and the Force, once a flowing river within him, felt distant, just a faint whisper. The footsteps of troopers were closing in again. Kirus's heart raced as he ducked into a narrow alley, hiding behind a stack of discarded crates. His breath came in short, panicked bursts. This is it! They've found me! The clones moved past him, their helmets scanning the area. He held his breath, willing his Force presence to vanish completely, but his fear betrayed him. The troopers stopped.
There.
One of them barked, pointing towards his hiding spot. Panic surged through Kirus. He reached for the training saber at his side, knowing it would be useless against these soldiers. He was too weak, too tired. His body trembled, and the cold reality of his situation settled in. He would die here, alone, like his friends had. But as the troopers advanced, a strange sensation washed over him. A presence, faint yet familiar, as though the air itself whispered to him. Suddenly, everything became still. The air thickened, a cold wind swirling through the alley. Despite Coruscant's normally warm, oppressive atmosphere, the troopers stopped dead in their tracks, frozen in place, as if some unseen force gripped them. Kirus, gasping, looked up. Before him, out of the shadows, a figure materialized. Cloaked in a misty aura, it was not a physical being, but a presence, something more. The figure seemed to shimmer, fading in and out of reality. The ghostly visage was of a man, though his features were blurred, unreadable. The troopers remained locked in place, held by the sheer power radiating from the spectral figure. Kirus stared wide-eyed, unsure if what he was seeing was real or some illusion conjured by his fear and desperation.
You do not belong here.
The voice echoed low and distant, as though it had traveled through time itself. It was not harsh or threatening, but it held an undeniable authority. Kirus's throat was dry, his voice barely a whisper.
Who are you?
The ghostly figure said nothing for a moment, merely looking down at Kirus. Then, with a wave of its ethereal hand, the clones fell to the ground, unconscious, their weapons clattering to the floor. The figure's presence grew stronger.
You must leave this place,
the figure replied, its voice haunting, yet somehow calming. Kirus tried to stand but faltered, collapsing onto the cold durasteel beneath him.
I can't. I have nowhere to go.
The figure moved closer, bending down as if to study him.
There is a place. You will be safe, but not forever.
Kirus blinked, confusion clouding his mind.
What do you mean? Where will I go?
The ghostly figure extended its hand, and despite the fact it was insubstantial, Kirus felt warmth surge through him.
Dantooine, hide there. Hide your presence, or you will be found.
The name rang in Kirus's ears. He had heard of Dantooine in the stories the older Jedi told. It was a remote world, long abandoned by the Jedi Order, far from the Empire's grasp.
Why are you helping me?
Kirus asked, his voice barely audible. The figure's eyes seemed to darken, a shadow passing through its form. Before Kirus could say another word, the ghost raised its hand, and the world around him began to blur. His body felt light, weightless. The cold of Coruscant faded away, and his surroundings transformed. When his vision cleared, he found himself standing in a vast, empty plain, Dantooine. The rolling green fields stretched far into the horizon, with nothing but the distant ruins of an ancient settlement to mark the landscape. It was quiet, peaceful, but Kirus felt no peace. The presence of the ghost was gone, and Kirus was alone, but the hatred burning within him remained. The ghost had given him a path, a chance to hide, to survive. But Kirus's heart was still consumed by the same darkness he had felt in Anakin's eyes. He would train, he would become stronger, and one day he would return to Coruscant, not to hide but to destroy the one who had taken everything from him. The sun had long set on Dantooine, leaving the once bright fields draped in twilight. Kirus Toll sat cross-legged in the center of an ancient ruin, his mind lost in meditation. Over the years he had learned to suppress his Force presence, hiding from the galaxy that had betrayed him. The ghostly figure that had once saved him was now a distant memory, and Kirus had spent his days consumed by a singular thought: revenge. The fire inside him never extinguished, only burning hotter with time. His training had been solitary, fueled by anger and hatred. He had grown stronger, more attuned to the Force in ways he hadn't imagined as a youngling. But despite his strength, there was something he had not mastered: how to track Force users over great distances.
They're still out there. Anakin is still out there. And I will find him.
As Kirus breathed deeply, focusing on the swirling emotions inside him, the Force rippled suddenly. The darkness he usually conjured within his mind gave way to something else, a light, soft and fleeting but undeniably present. It was like a thread tugging at him, beckoning. His eyes snapped open. Someone was reaching out to him through the Force. In the middle of the ruined temple, Kirus stood. The faintest shimmer of a vision began to form before him. At first it was indistinct, little more than a glowing presence, but as the vision solidified, he recognized her immediately. Ahsoka Tano. Her face, familiar from whispers within the temple long ago, was calm yet powerful. Her white montrals and leku framed her determined expression, and her aura radiated with a force unlike anything Kirus had ever felt before. It wasn't the overwhelming darkness he had come to know in himself, it was something else, balanced, pure. The sight of her filled him with conflicting emotions. Curiosity and rage intertwined. Kirus was no longer the youngling that trembled in fear, he was a hunter. The vision of Ahsoka raised her hand, her voice echoing within his mind, though her lips never moved.
You are not alone, Kirus. There are others, survivors.
His heart skipped. Survivors. He had long suspected that he was not the only one left from the purge, but hearing the confirmation sent a shock through him. His pulse quickened. If there were others, they could lead him to Anakin.
Follow the Force,
She continued, her presence flickering like a star.
Not all who wield it are your enemies.
Kirus's fist clenched, his anger boiling to the surface.
No!
He muttered, his voice trembling with fury.
You're wrong. The Jedi failed us. You failed us. I will find Anakin. And when I do, I will end this. The Force will burn with the blood of those who betrayed me.
The vision of Ahsoka didn't waver, her calm expression unyielding in the face of his hatred.
You cannot defeat darkness with more darkness, Kirus. Your path is clouded by rage, but there is still time.
Kirus lunged forward, striking at the vision with his hand, though he knew it was futile. The figure dissolved into nothingness, leaving him alone in the cold ruins. His breath came in sharp bursts, his anger seething. The serenity of the Force, which Ahsoka had embodied, left him feeling hollow, but she had revealed something he could use. He closed his eyes, focusing, letting the Force stretch out around him. Over the years, he had learned to push his senses beyond the limits of the average Force user. He could feel the presence of beings across the stars, their life forces faint but distinct. Ahsoka's vision had awoken something in him, a power that had been dormant. He could track Force users. Far beyond Dantooine, he felt them, flickers of light and dark scattered across the galaxy like dying embers. He could sense their pain, their isolation, Jedi survivors of Order 66, hiding in the shadows. But most of all, he could feel her, Ahsoka. Her presence was strong, a beacon among the others. Kirus stood, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. He had spent years in exile, hiding, biding his time, but now he had a way forward. The galaxy wasn't as empty as he had once thought, but he wasn't searching for allies. He wasn't seeking to restore the Jedi Order. He would find Ahsoka. He would find all of them, and then he would find Anakin Skywalker. Kirus's lips curled into a twisted grin. He felt the darkness surge within him as the path became clear. Ahsoka will lead me to him, and once he found her, he would use her to track down the one who had left him alive when he should have perished with his friends. His hatred for the Jedi, for the Force, only grew stronger. His mind raced, but deep within, a quiet truth lingered. He no longer cared about the balance between light and dark. He wanted to destroy it all. Turning his gaze to the sky, Kirus whispered into the night,
I'm coming for you, Ahsoka. You will lead me to him.
With that, Kirus left the ruined temple on Dantooine, his exile over. The power to find Force users pulsed within him, guiding him, and with each step he took, the line between hunter and hunted blurred. Days later, on a nameless, deserted planet, the night had fallen on the dense forest, the crackling of the campfire the only sound echoing through the darkness. The stars above were distant, muted by the canopy of trees that surrounded them. Kirus Toll sat opposite Ahsoka Tano, his face cast in shadows by the flickering flames. His expression was calm, almost serene, though beneath it his mind seethed with barely controlled rage. He had found her, Ahsoka, the woman he thought would lead him to Anakin, but now that he was here, something unexpected happened. She was trying to save him. Her eyes watched him carefully, as if she could feel the storm brewing inside him. She had sensed his darkness from the moment they met, the raw anger bubbling beneath the surface. Yet, instead of distancing herself, she had chosen to help. She believed he could be brought back to the light, that she could save him from himself.
You don't have to walk this path,
Ahsoka said softly, her voice gentle yet firm, her expression devoid of any fear or suspicion. She didn't fear him.
The anger you carry, it will consume you. I've seen it before. It's not too late to turn back.
Kirus gazed into the fire, his eyes reflecting the flames. Inside, his heart raced. She doesn't understand. She thought she could convince him, sway him back to the Jedi way, but she didn't realize how far gone he already was. He had spent years in exile, alone with his hatred, The Jedi had failed him. They had failed his friends. And Ahsoka, this traitor who had left the Order, thought she could fix him? She was the key, his key, to finding Anakin, but now her words only deepened his resentment.
I don't know what to do.
Kirus said, his voice small, almost trembling. His eyes watered as he looked up at her, playing the role of the innocent youngling he no longer was.
I've been so lost. I need your help.
Ahsoka's expression softened. She approached him cautiously, kneeling beside the fire.
It's all right. I'm here now. I can help you, but you have to trust me. The dark side will only lead to more suffering, more loss.
Kirus looked down, pretending to wipe a tear from his eye. Inside, his mind churned with cold calculations.
She trusts me. She was so sure of herself, so sure that I am just a scared, broken child. She doesn't see what's coming.
Ahsoka placed a gentle hand on his shoulder.
We'll find a way to fix this, together.
The words echoed in his mind, but they meant nothing to him. In that moment, he realized how easy it would be to kill her. Hours passed, and the forest grew still. The fire had dwindled to embers, casting long, eerie shadows over the camp. Ahsoka lay peacefully across from him, resting under the canopy of stars, her breathing steady and calm. Kirus lay awake, his eyes wide open, staring at the sky. His heart pounded in his chest. His mind was made up. The hatred inside him was too great to ignore. This is what must be done. Slowly, carefully, he rose from his spot by the fire. The forest was quiet, save for the soft rustle of leaves in the night breeze. He crept toward Ahsoka's sleeping form, his training saber in hand. His grip tightened around the hilt as he knelt beside her. He hesitated for a moment, watching her sleep. She had spared him, trusted him, even tried to save him. But this wasn't about mercy. It wasn't about saving anyone. It was about revenge. Kirus raised the saber. His eyes burned with fury as he brought it down swiftly. The blade ignited with a flash of light and heat, and in an instant, Ahsoka's life was extinguished. Her body lay still, a faint expression of shock frozen on her face. For a moment, Kirus simply stood there, the weight of his actions sinking in. His hands trembled, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. He had done it. He had killed a Jedi. But instead of relief, a wave of something else washed over him, something dark, more powerful than anything he had ever felt before. His heart pounded in his chest as he stumbled back, falling to the ground. Suddenly, the forest grew cold, the air thick with a suffocating darkness. Kirus could feel the ground vibrating beneath him, and the fire, now reduced to embers, extinguished completely. A swirling aura of dark energy began to surround him, creeping up his limbs like a shadowy mist. His vision blurred, the world around him spinning as the energy enveloped him. And then it appeared, Force ghosts, multiples, just like the one from the past, their forms ethereal and glowing, yet twisted and malevolent. Their eyes burned with an unnatural light, and they whispered to him in a language he couldn't understand. Kirus gasped, clutching his head as the voices grew louder, their words piercing through his mind like daggers. He could feel their power, their hatred, their dark energy pouring into him, threatening to tear him apart from the inside. His body convulsed, his mind a whirl of chaos and confusion. The ghosts surrounded him, their presence overwhelming. He couldn't make out their faces, but their voices were clear, cold, ancient, filled with a power that terrified him. They spoke words that made no sense to his ears, but resonated deep within his soul.
What are you?
Kirus choked, his voice weak. The ghosts drew closer, their energy seeping into him, filling him with a power he couldn't control. It was too much, too overwhelming. His vision darkened, the world spinning faster and faster until everything went black. Kirus Toll awoke with a sharp breath, his body stiff and drenched in cold sweat. The forest around him was unnervingly quiet, the sky above still blanketed in darkness. His mind, however, was aflame, seared with the remnants of the vision he had just experienced. The Force ghosts were gone, but they had left something behind, a gift, or perhaps a curse. His hands trembled as he pushed himself to his feet, eyes scanning the camp. Ahsoka's lifeless body lay undisturbed beside the extinguished fire. He looked at her with a mixture of contempt and regret, the weight of what he'd done settling heavily on his shoulders. She was supposed to be the key, he thought, the one to lead me to Anakin. But now she was gone, and he was alone again. For a brief moment, doubt crept into his mind. Had he gone too far? Was he losing control? He had never felt power like this before, and yet, in that surge of darkness, something inside him had begun to unravel. Then the vision struck him again. His breath caught in his throat as he saw it clearly, the vast dunes of a desert planet, its twin suns burning bright in the sky. Tatooine. He could feel the heat, the dryness of the air as if he was standing there in the flesh. But the landscape wasn't what captured his attention. It was the boy. A young boy, no older than the age Kirus had been when he lost everything at the Jedi Temple. Kirus's heart pounded in his chest as he recognized the boy's face. It was unmistakable, Anakin. But it wasn't the man who had massacred his friends, nor the cold, terrifying figure that haunted his nightmares. No, this was a child, a version of Anakin Skywalker he had only heard whispers about. The slave boy from Tatooine, the one who had been taken in by the Jedi and twisted into the monster Kirus now hunted. The vision showed Kirus more than just a glimpse. He saw the boy in his daily life running through the streets, playing among the wreckage of old starships filled with hope and light. The stark contrast to the man he had become filled Kirus with disgust. The Force was leading him to Tatooine, showing him the path forward. This child, this echo of Anakin, was the key. He wasn't sure if it was truly the past or something else entirely, but it didn't matter. Kirus could feel it in his bones. This boy needed to die. Anakin needed to die. But something gnawed at him deep inside. A child. Could he kill a child? Even with all his anger, all his hatred, this was different. The question rattled in his mind as he stumbled back from the vision, his knees weak, his head spinning, his chest heaved with each breath, torn between the fury that had driven him this far and the faint flicker of doubt that still clung to him.
No.
He muttered to himself, shaking his head.
It's not about what's right. It's about justice.
But even as the words left his lips, they felt hollow. Kirus was no longer sure if justice was what he sought. This had gone far beyond vengeance. He wanted to destroy the Force itself, to eradicate all who wielded its power, light or dark. As the night deepened around him, Kirus felt the pull of the dark side stronger than ever before. The voices of the Force ghosts echoed in his mind, urging him forward, pushing him toward his final test. They whispered promises of power, of vengeance, of the end of his suffering. All he had to do was take the final step. But somewhere, deep within the storm of anger and hatred, a tiny voice, the voice of the youngling he once was, whispered a question. Is this really who you've become? Kirus froze, staring out into the night. His resolve faltered for the first time in years. The darkness inside him raged, demanding that he kill the boy, that he fulfill his purpose. But the thought lingered. The boy in the vision wasn't the monster he hunted. The decision weighed on him like a crushing weight, testing his very soul. Could he sacrifice his last shred of humanity for the sake of his revenge? Slowly, his hand reached for the hilt of his saber. His eyes hardened as he made his choice. He would go to Tatooine, he would end it, once and for all. The twin sons of Tatooine cast long shadows across the barren landscape as Kirus Toll approached the small, worn-down homestead nestled in the dunes. His eyes narrowed, fixed on the house where he knew his target lived. A boy, young and full of potential, just as he had been once. Kirus's heart thudded in his chest, his breath shallow and quick. This was it. The moment his entire existence had been leading to. Inside that house was a boy, the echo of Anakin Skywalker, his final challenge, his ultimate revenge. But before he could step closer, a presence flickered in the Force. The wind seemed to still, and Kirus's hand instinctively fell to the hilt of his newfound lightsaber. From the shadows of a nearby rocky outcrop, a figure emerged, robed, his face weathered and wise, Obi-Wan Kenobi. The Jedi's presence was calm but firm, like the eye of a storm, his gaze locked with Kirus, and in that moment, the weight of the encounter hung heavy between them. Obi-Wan's face softened, as if seeing not just the boy before him, but the path he had walked, the pain that had brought him here.
You're filled with anger.
Obi-Wan said quietly, his voice calm, though tinged with sorrow.
I can feel the darkness surrounding you. You've come here to kill an innocent.
Kirus snarled, igniting the lightsaber he took from Ahsoka with a snap hiss, its silver blade casting a menacing glow.
He's not innocent. He will become what Anakin was. I'll end it before it even begins.
Obi-Wan didn't reach for his weapon. He took a step forward, hands open in a gesture of peace.
The future is not written. You don't have to follow this path, child. There is still hope for you.
The boy's rage flared and dark energy crackled around him. Don't speak to me about hope, Kirus spat.
Anakin killed my friends and slaughtered everyone I knew, and I will do the same to his kin, even if I have to kill every last one of you Jedi.
Obi-Wan's expression darkened, and the sadness in his eyes deepened.
Anakin is gone, but this boy, he is not him. You're being manipulated by the very thing that destroyed your life.
Kirus's hands trembled on the hilt of his saber. The darkness within him swelled, urging him to strike, to kill, to end it all. The voices in his head, the Force ghosts that had whispered power to him for so long, grew louder, pushing him forward. Kill him, destroy him, you are the chosen weapon. But Kirus hesitated. Sensing the boy's inner conflict, Obi-Wan saw his opportunity.
You still have a choice. You don't have to let the darkness control you. You can be free.
Suddenly, the voices inside Kirus's mind howled in fury. They surged forward with such intensity that Kirus cried out, clutching his head in pain. The world around him blurred as the dark energy wrapped tighter, threatening to consume him whole. His breathing became ragged, his vision red with fury. Obi-Wan stepped back, his hand finally moving to the hilt of his lightsaber.
I didn't want this,
He murmured softly.
but if I must, I will stop you.
With a swift motion, Obi-Wan's lightsaber ignited in a brilliant blue, its hum filling the air. The two stood facing each other, one calm, controlled, and centered, the other a storm of raw, untamed fury. Kirus lunged first, his saber swinging wildly, the power of the dark side enhancing his strength and speed. Obi-Wan blocked effortlessly, their blades clashing with sparks, the force of Kirus' attacks pushing him back. Despite the boy's strength, Obi-Wan remained focused, deflecting each strike with precision. But as the fight dragged on, it became clear that something was wrong. Kirus was growing stronger, faster, unnaturally so. Dark tendrils of energy spiraled from him, wrapping around his form like a vortex of malevolent power. His eyes glowed with a deep, unnatural red as his strikes became more ferocious, more relentless. He fought not just with skill, but with overwhelming fury, and for the first time, Obi-Wan faltered. The ground beneath them shook as Kirus unleashed a wave of lighting, sending Obi-Wan stumbling back. His breaths came heavy now, his strength waning against the raw power that was Kirus. The boy was no longer fighting alone. The dark side itself fought with him, but Obi-Wan saw through it. He knew what was happening. The boy had become a vessel for the dark spirits that haunted him, his anger a channel for their destructive power. He couldn't defeat the boy with his lightsaber alone. Gathering the force around him, Obi-Wan made a choice, a desperate gamble. He shut his eyes and reached out, not to attack but to connect. His mind plunged deep into the force, searching for the boy beneath the darkness, the boy who had once been innocent, who had once sought only to survive.
Kirus.
Obi-Wan's voice echoed in the youngling's mind. For a split second, Kirus hesitated, his saber freezing mid-swing. He felt Obi-Wan's presence not as an enemy, but as a beacon of light cutting through the shadows. The dark energy within him writhed, fighting to hold control, but Obi-Wan's influence was strong.
You're not alone.
Obi-Wan whispered through the force.
Let go of the darkness. Let go of your hate.
Kirus's face twisted in anguish. He screamed, the voices in his head raging against the Jedi's influence. But something within him, deep, buried beneath layers of pain, responded. For the first time in years, he felt something other than anger. He felt peace. The darkness recoiled, its grip loosening as Kirus's mind reeled, but in that moment of weakness, something snapped. The dark spirits shrieked in fury, and before Obi-Wan could react, Kirus surged forward with renewed strength. He swung his saber in a blind fury, and this time, Obi-Wan was too slow. The white blade sliced through the Jedi's defenses, cutting deep into his side. Obi-Wan staggered, falling to his knees, clutching his wound as his lightsaber fell from his grasp. His breathing was labored, his strength fading. Kirus stood over him, panting, his face twisted in rage and confusion. The darkness within him had reasserted its control, but Obi-Wan's words still echoed in his mind. For a brief moment, he hesitated, looking down at the fallen Jedi. But the dark spirits urged him on, demanding blood, demanding death. With trembling hands, Kirus raised his saber, ready to deliver the final blow. But as he looked into Obi-Wan's eyes, he saw no fear, only sorrow.
You still have a choice.
Obi-Wan whispered, his voice weak but steady.
It's not too late.
Kirus Toll stood motionless, the warm, dry air of Tatooine swirling around him as he stared down at the lifeless body of Obi-Wan Kenobi. His chest heaved with each breath, but his mind was numb, disconnected from the horror of what he had just done. The white glow of his lightsaber flickered and died, leaving him alone in the fading light of the desert evening. His hands trembled as he took a step back, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. He had killed Obi-Wan, not just a Jedi, but a man who had tried to help him, a man who had shown him mercy, compassion, and an alternative to the rage that had consumed him for so long. Kirus's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the ground beside the fallen Jedi, his heart pounding in his chest. His mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, anger, sorrow, confusion. But beneath it all, a deep, gnawing sense of dread began to bubble to the surface. He had felt it for years now, like a dark presence lurking just out of reach. But now, in the stillness of Obi-Wan's death, the pieces finally started to fall into place. The visions that had haunted him, the whispers of power, the Force ghost that had saved him all those years ago in the Jedi Temple. It was all connected. And the truth was far more terrifying than anything Kirus had imagined. His breath quickened as the realization hit him like a crashing wave. The Force ghost wasn't a guardian of light. It wasn't a Sith either. It was Anakin Skywalker, or rather, the dark, fractured essence of him.
No.
Kirus whispered to himself, his voice trembling.
It can't be.
Suddenly, the air around him shifted, and the familiar, eerie presence he had felt before returned. Dark tendrils of energy swirled in the corners of his vision, and a cold, disembodied voice spoke from within his mind.
You've always known, Kirus. You've always been me.
Kirus gasped, clutching his head as the dark presence invaded his thoughts, the realization crashing down on him with crushing weight. Anakin, the dark side of Anakin, had been with him from the beginning. It had saved him in the Jedi Temple, whispered in his ear, led him down this path of vengeance and destruction.
Why?
Kirus cried out, his voice breaking.
What do you want?
The voice, deep and filled with menace, responded with cold certainty. I am what remains of Anakin Skywalker's darkness. When I was consumed by hatred in the temple, I split into two. The light side of me, weak, remorseful, stayed in my body and tried to fight Palpatine, dying in vain. But I endured. And now, through you, I will continue. Kirus's mind reeled. It all made sense now. The dark visions, the uncontrollable rage, the voices pushing him to kill. He had been nothing more than a vessel, a tool for the dark side of Anakin's fractured soul. He hadn't been acting of his own will. The dark part of Anakin had been manipulating him, using him as a pawn to fulfill its twisted plan.
The boy.
Kirus whispered, his eyes widening in horror.
You wanted me to find the boy on Tatooine. Yes.
The voice purred.
The boy is Anakin's son, and he is the key to the future. But before he can join the dark side, those who would protect him, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, had to be eliminated. And you, Kirus, have done exactly that.
Kirus's stomach churned. He had been played, used to kill the very people who might have saved the galaxy, and now, with Obi-Wan dead and the dark presence still inside him, the boy, Luke Skywalker, was vulnerable. The dark side of Anakin had orchestrated everything. Tears welled in Kirus's eyes as the full weight of his actions bore down on him. He had killed Ahsoka. He had killed Obi-Wan. He had let his anger blind him, allowed the dark side to take hold, and now there was nothing left but the darkness. But deep inside, a small flicker of something else remained, something that Obi-Wan's words had left behind, hope, a chance, however small, to break free.
No.
Kirus muttered, clenching his fists.
I won't do it. I won't be your puppet anymore.
The dark presence within him hissed, angry and mocking.
You think you can fight me now, after all we've done together? You're too weak. You always have been.
Kirus stood, his resolve hardening. The darkness swirled around him, trying to crush him under its weight, but he refused to give in. Not anymore.
I may be weak,
he said, his voice trembling but determined.
but I'll never be you.
The dark energy lashed out, searing through his mind, but Kirus stood firm. With a final desperate surge of willpower, he reached out into the Force, searching for something, anything to hold on to, and there, in the depths of his mind, he felt it, the light, the part of himself that had been buried beneath the darkness all these years. With a scream of defiance, Kirus pushed the darkness away, banishing the presence of the dark Anakin from his mind. The oppressive energy dissipated, leaving him alone, shaking and breathless. For the first time in years, Kirus felt free, but it came at a terrible cost. Obi-Wan lay dead at his feet, and the boy, Anakin's son, was still out there, vulnerable to the dark side. Kirus had no choice now. He had to find him, not to kill him, as the dark presence had wanted, but to protect him, to stop the cycle of vengeance and hatred from continuing. With a heavy heart and a mind filled with regret, Kirus turned away from the homestead. His path was no longer one of revenge, but of redemption. He knew it wouldn't be easy. The darkness inside him was still there, lurking, waiting for a moment of weakness. But for now, he had control. For now, he had a purpose. And he would make sure that what remained of Anakin's darkness would never claim another victim. The twin suns of Tatooine dipped below the horizon, casting long orange shadows across the sand. The night had settled in, and the silence of the desert was only broken by the soft, whispering wind. Kirus Toll stood alone on a distant hill, overlooking the homestead where he had faced his most harrowing battle. The bodies had been buried, the echoes of his confrontation with Obi-Wan still reverberating in his mind. He gazed out towards the stars, the weight of his actions heavy on his shoulders. His anger was still there, a deep, persistent ember in the depths of his heart, but now it had a new focus, a new target. From the sand emerged a figure, an old ally, one of the few left who had managed to survive the purges. The figure was cloaked, their identity hidden beneath the folds of their garments. It was a reminder that even in darkness, there were still those who fought against the Empire.
Palpatine is the true enemy. He must be stopped. The Empire has to fall.
Kirus looked up at the stars, a sense of purpose igniting within him. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with battles and trials, but he was ready. He had faced his inner demons and emerged with a new resolve. The anger and pain were still there, but they were now tools for justice rather than instruments of vengeance. Kirus took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air against his skin. The journey ahead would be difficult, but he was no longer alone. He had a purpose and a path to redemption. With one final glance at the desert landscape, he set his sights on the horizon, ready to embrace his new role. As he walked away from the hill, the stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, as if offering a glimmer of hope for the future. The story ends on a note of cautious optimism. Kirus is now committed to fighting the Empire and protecting Luke Skywalker, setting the stage for the battles and challenges to come. There's a sense of closure in his journey from vengeance to redemption, but the future remains uncertain.